Welcome to episode 6 of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm Atoves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. It's our 6th episode, and the Roadrunners reached their 6th win. We're going to make some hot takes on our win over Southern Miss, as well as throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for listeners to love or hate. UTSA hung on for a pivotal 6th win against Southern Miss this week. It marked the first time the Roadrunners have won in Hattiesburg. It wasn't pretty, but it was a win. Once again, the offense got out to a slow start, going 3 and out on their first drive and throwing an interception on the second drive. Frank Harris was able to connect with Zachary Franklin for a second quarter touchdown pass. On the defensive side, the Runners had a better start, holding Southern Miss to a field goal in the first quarter. The defense added a wacky safety in the second quarter, but followed up with 2 unnecessary penalties on a later drive, a targeting call by Antonio Parks, and a personal foul by Ken Robinson that helped contribute to a Southern Miss touchdown drive. Special teams came up big for the Roadrunners in the first half, with Trevor Harmonson picking up on a fake field goal and saving a touchdown drive. The Roadrunners had 95 yards of total offense as they headed into the halftime down 10-9. Fortunately, the offense was able to get the run game going in the third quarter, with Sincere McCormick going off with a 69-yard touchdown. He added a second rushing touchdown on the following drive, following an interception by Rashad Wisdom. The Runners were held scoreless in the fourth quarter. While the defense struggled to contain running back Frank Gore Jr. and gave up 10 points in the second half, they were able to do just enough to hold on to a victory for UTSA. Overall, the Roadrunners had 304 yards of offense, 233 yards rushing, and just 71 yards passing. Frank Harris finished the night with 12 of 19 passing, with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Like most fans, I was expecting to see a really confident offense come out against Southern Miss this game, especially after our win last week at UTEP. I mean, I knew that Southern Miss is more talented than UTEP, and more talented really than their record reflected, but I was really expecting UTSA to run away with this, and instead we got a nail-biter.
Yeah, things kind of change when you go on the road. It's tough to win on the road. We've kind of talked about it throughout our podcast now that we're in our 6th episode. But it is difficult to go on the road and actually win because things change. You're not in your familiar bed. You're not in your familiar routine. So you've changed things up, and that's where the good teams really start separating themselves from each other. They went on the road. And while this was like a ugly win, I thought it was a testament to them just being resilient and finding some way to get over themselves and over the way they were playing and be able to come away with that 6th win. Southern Miss is more talented. I just thought that they would lay down a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And when I say lay down, I just think that with all the shots that UTSA was taking, especially rushing wise, that at some point they just wouldn't be able to hold up. And I think that's kind of what happened, except that you kind of become really predictable when you can't do anything on the passing game.
Right.
And so with that's where I think some of the problems with the offense started. I think we've I've heard some other people say the same thing. But yeah, I mean, I think from just what we watched yesterday, it was encouraging to see these guys be up for this and go into Hattiesburg and get a win. And I had previously mentioned, you're going to have to find that energy at some point, even if it means you're in Hattiesburg, you're in Ruston, wherever, some hole in the wall town in whatever state you're in, and get up for this to win a game. And, they did.
Yeah. And talk about resilience. I mean, look at everything that Southern Miss has faced this year between, their carousel of coaches. They had a quarterback who came back this game, looks like maybe he got injured at the end. I mean, they obviously had a lot of things working against them. And so I think that's where, a lot of people didn't expect them to be able to play as well, just given all of the adversity that they faced.
I mean, even with the quarterback, I think it's Jack Abraham, even with him, they were struggling.
Yeah.
So, I think it's just one of those odd years. They haven't been able to handle it too well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it happens. And, let's be honest. We thought at the beginning of this year, we thought that that's what was going to happen. And then I think it was the first or second podcast episode for us that you said, under different leadership, this probably would have happened. We would have just kind of snowballed down and it would have turned into something bad.
Yeah, we would be the one with Southern Miss's record.
Yeah. But, we got Jeff Traylor, and, he's totally changed us around. He's been able to handle this well. And, also, quick, just kudos again. We've said it a few times, obviously, to Coach Traylor, but also kudos to Lisa Campos, because she's been able to somehow find a way to maintain some sort of sanity and some sort of way for the football team to succeed. And there's upteenth reasons why they shouldn't have been able to succeed, and that could have been the excuse, but they haven't made excuses. They've just soldiered on, and it's just good to see those guys celebrate at the end. I know that I saw some backlash from like Southern Miss, whatever, the Gatorade bath on Traylor, but I mean, you just see how much the guys love Traylor, and
Right.
I'm pretty sure you saw the tweet. I think it was, I can't remember who it was that tweeted out, he's the best coach I've ever played for.
I think it was DeQuarius Henry. Yeah. It was interesting because earlier this week I had read an article that was in 247 Sports about, kind of the pandemic and what it's done with coaching in general. And the article was really specifically talking about Michigan. But one of the things that they talked about in the article was, it sort of pulled back the curtain to look at, the difference between really good coaches, mediocre coaches, and bad coaches. And, their point was that, when you come into this situation in a pandemic where you're facing adversity and everyone is facing adversity,
right,
the good coaches will rise to the occasion because they have a plan, even if they have a depleted roster. And so between that comment and then this week hearing Leroy Watson in one of the post-practice interviews talk about, hey, we've always knew we had good athletes here. We knew we had good coaches, but we didn't have the right leader to help us win. It was just kind of interesting to sort of see all of that come together. And like you said earlier, I mean, a lot of this, the ability for them to be resilient goes back to Jeff Traylor and really shows that he is a great coach.
And that's what I've been going back and forth saying, that coaching matters, because as much as people want to say no, it really doesn't. It does. You see the difference in the team. They still make mistakes, but you see what his plan of action can actually build within our university. And because of the fact that I think he does have a plan, I think it makes it easier to start seeing how he can actually continue to build and how he continue to have some success. And I think that's really what we're looking for. I think this is where the football team starts turning the corner. We're in year 10. We finally got, it looks like, a little bit more stability in terms of leadership. And hopefully what we can see from here is them to continue to build this from here. But let's go back to the game. I mean, I know we've talked about Coach Traylor here, but let's start off talking about the defense, because we normally don't talk too much about the defense. We usually give about a minute or two, and we give like 8 to 10 minutes on offense. But let's start with the defense. Look, I will tell you this. I didn't think they had their best game. To me, they were a little better than the offense, but I wouldn't say that they were necessarily great. They did enough. They looked like they were trying to be as aggressive as possible, and it wasn't smart play. And I think I saw that actually earlier today from something Jared from Elmwood Audible said, is, they just weren't playing smart. And, that's a great way to describe them, is that it was almost like we went back to game one and we were just trying to give the full effort, and hopefully things fell in place. Had they played a little smarter, I think there would have been some bigger plays to make. I think there would have been more opportunities. They still made some big plays, but I think that still goes back to everybody giving on the defense the full effort to Coach Traylor.
Right. I mean, if you look at the first half, the 2 scores that Southern Miss got, both their field goal and their touchdown, came after, us making penalties and not making smart plays. And the first, that field goal, there was a personal foul from Hicks. Because of that foul, they got into the red zone. Again, we held them to a field goal, which is great. But if we hadn't made that, personal foul, it might have been, a different scenario. They may not have scored. And then, when you go back to that drive, they scored the touchdown on, we had the targeting penalty against Antonio Parks. And then you had the personal foul with Ken Robinson. And both of those fouls gave, a lot of yardage to Southern Miss that, again, had those fouls not happened or penalties not happened, it could have been a different drive. And in that case, they gave up a touchdown.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, that we know we hear the whole narrative at times about penalties, and it's like, oh, they're untimely. Well, there's not really a timely penalty, like unless you are taking like a knee or something, or you take a delay a game. Oh, it's a timely penalty. We knew that this was but a penalty is usually going to be something odd that you're going to get, and that wasn't what you're expecting. Somebody made a mistake, and this again, they didn't have a clean game on defense, but it always seems to fit everybody's narrative that, oh, look, we made a great play, but it's going to be erased because of a mistake. Well, I think there's more mistakes happening out there. It's just, how does that really affect the game? And at times those flags are going to come. And of course, it's easy to build that narrative that costs us the issue. I mean, the Antonio Parks, it seemed like he took a little bit of tackling advice from Rashad Wisdom from early in the season, because there was really no reason for him to kind of lower that helmet.
Mm-hmm.
He did, and I think immediately he had this kind of feeling that they're going to throw that flag. And when I saw it, I was like, at first I said, no, they're not going to do it. And then you see that flag fly, and then you see the replay, and I'm like, crushing, because Antonio has been having a really good season ever since a kind of rough start. But because we already have razor thin experience in safety areas, it was like, all right, well, we take him out. Now we bring in Savion, who had some issues early on, but again, I think him and Antonio were just trying to figure out what to do in that safety position. But Savion just wasn't, he wasn't around that much, because I think a little bit later on, he just got hit. He took a shot to the head, and I was really concerned about him. I didn't get to see what, if he was okay. It looks like he did play more, get more plays, but honestly, he just kind of staggered and was going towards the Southern Miss sideline, and he had to get redirected to go to UTSA. So it was a little disconcerting, because now you're having to figure out who's going to go in at safety. So, again, some of these penalties, especially I would say the ones where you're talking about targeting, are very concerning, because you get kicked out of the game. Luckily, I would say, and I say luckily, just saying it's not going to cost UTSA too much, because he'll be back for the start of the North Texas game.
Right.
But had this been late in the game, he's out for the first half.
Right. Speaking of Savion, I think he got robbed of that interception in the third quarter. Really watching the replay, I don't know. I thought he got his hand under the ball. So we did get, an interception with Rashad Wisdom, though, clean reception, which we, ended up converting into points. So again, the defense, they had a good game. They just didn't have a great game like we expected them to have.
Right.
But again, they were the difference maker and keeping, getting us that victory, because we just couldn't get anything going on offense in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think the secondary got picked on a lot. They had some problems with some of the receivers for Southern Miss, but it happens, and I think that that's going to be something to watch coming into North Texas, because North Texas is pretty much a spread team, so it's going to be very similar to what, not exactly, but similar style to what we saw against Texas State and what we've seen, from some other spread teams. So, I think the defense is going to go back to that bend but don't break philosophy. The question is, are they going to be able to make the tackles?
Statistic I just saw about the game, Frank Gore Jr. had the highest percentage of missed tackles in week 12. There were 13 tackle attempts, 9 forced missed tackles. So not a great statistic. Overall, I think he had like 70 yards rushing. Southern Miss only had 75 yards total rushing. So he was all of their rushing.
Right.
But certainly not what we want to see in terms of a statistic out there, particularly if we're going to, win against North Texas next week.
That's a good point. But, I think this tackling has, like you said, been an issue all year. I don't know that it's necessarily going to get fixed, but, again, it fits into the narrative, the penalties and the tackling. So hopefully the guys are focused. They'll be at home. So coming off of Thanksgiving together. So, I would hope that we're a little more focused this week than we were in Hattiesburg.
Yeah. So this was the second game called by Jess Lepp. He said in his interview last week that he thought he was a little conservative the first couple of drives against UTEP. Did you see a difference in his play calling this week?
Yeah, I thought he brought more pressure earlier on than he did before. Like last week against UTEP, I think he was driving us crazy because first of all, we didn't know it was him. We thought we were thinking, what is Nix doing? Like he is literally just sending 3 guys and dropping everybody back. And UTEP's not great, but even they have an opportunity to cut us apart when you just have all these guys running free. And you need to put pressure on the quarterback. That's how you win games. Doesn't matter which level of the football that you're at. So I think he learned from that, and I think he did his best to put the guys in position to win. He can't do anything about the tackling. On that Gore touchdown, 51-yarder, it's just laughable because, when we saw it on TV, I thought that there was an opportunities, and then you just saw Gore just take off, and it was, okay, well, there we go again. But there were other opportunities where it seems like the guys are coming in with shoulders instead of just actually wrapping up. And so that was a big problem.
Let's talk a little bit about special teams. I mean, we usually don't really talk that much about special teams, but they had a really big play here in this game.
Yeah, Trevor Hardmanson came through. I will say it was kind of interesting that he said after the game that they knew that fake was coming. And he said they were all calling it out, which kind of begs the question of, if Southern Miss heard that, why did they go forward with it with the fake? Like, it didn't make sense. It almost reminds me of Necessary Roughness back in that game, where like the very first play, all the guys on defense are saying man in motion, man in motion. Everybody's calling it out, and they all go with the man in motion, and then they just throw the ball to the guy that's not covered because everybody had called it and everybody went towards the guy in motion. It was so silly. It was like, why are you doing that? Like at this point, why don't you act like you're going to do it and then just do a quick audible and say, you know what, we're going to go ahead and kick it.
Right.
I get why they wanted to go for it. They wanted to throw us off. They wanted to at least try to score and then really put the pressure on us. But instead, I think it put them behind the 8 ball. So
yeah. In this game, we also saw that Lucas Dean was punting much better than we've seen the last couple of games. I mean, he was definitely a weapon, as Traylor called him, in the first couple of games, and then it seemed like he struggled, maybe the last 2 games, not pinning people, back in the 20-yard line or, behind the 20-yard line. But this game, he seemed to be back to himself.
Yeah, it seemed like he was much more directional with the way he was controlling his kicks better. I think some of the reasons why he struggled before was because he was kicking it to the middle of the field and giving the punt return teams an opportunity to set up blocking and to make a return. This time he really was angling much more towards the sidelines. He was putting it closer. At least one of them was a little bit closer, I would say, to the hash mark, but it was deep in Southern Miss territory, and I believe it was Xavier Spencer. I think his dad, I saw, had tweeted this out, but just great coverage on it because they pinned him down to like the 2 or 3 yard line. So again, if he's kicking directionally and doing well there, great. But if you start putting it down the middle too many times, you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, and once again, we saw Ornstein doing the kickoffs, and I almost kind of wonder, is Hunter hurt? We saw him, I think it was in the UTEP game, chase down a guy who was, returning one of the field goals, and he wasn't the one who ultimately chased him down and tackled him, but
it was Ken Robinson who was the one who chased him down, but
Hunter was, he was really following him, and then afterwards he sort of looked like maybe he had pulled something or he just didn't quite look right. So I'm almost wondering if maybe, he got hurt or he's not feeling the best, and that's why they're giving the place kicking over to Ornstein. But
yeah, I mean, it's a good point because even on the extra points, it seems like he kind of struggles a little bit, and it's a little odd. It's not like his normal self. So it is a good note there that maybe he is facing something. And besides, I think even with the kickoffs, he really wasn't kicking them very deep anyway. He would get them. It wasn't like he was getting a lot of touchbacks. So I think this is a good opportunity to bring in Ornstein. And if you're not going to have him kick field goals or kick extra points, having him kick off and giving him the opportunity to at least get some gaming experience, get some stuff from Coach Perry, figure out what, how he needs to cover, what he needs to do. He's getting some really good kickoffs in there. So.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the offense now.
Yikes.
To me, I felt like Frank took a step back here. I thought he looked more like his performance at La Tech than he did it against La Tech than he did against against UTEP. It just sort of seemed like he was struggling in a way that you wouldn't expect, because you kind of felt like he had this breakthrough game last week. He's going to use that as a springboard, and we're going to have a great game this week. And it just seemed like it just didn't work for him.
I mean, I think it just goes back to the history that we've already painted to this point, which is he's really good against the teams that aren't very good, but the Southern Miss defense is somewhat talented. They've got, guys back there. So one thing to just kind of keep in mind is that he can't out-athlete. And that's what I've been saying all year about him, is he can't out-athlete some of these defenses. So he's got to be better passing. Well, he was not good passing at all.
No. And that interception he threw was just, I don't know what he was thinking.
I don't know either. And I mean, whether it's play design, whatever, but you have to play smarter there. And those are those moments when you look back as a quarterback and you have to say, I just need to make the smart play. I don't need to try to make the big play all the time, but I need to make the smart play. And why he decided he wanted to shot put it, I think it was to Oscar Cardenas. He didn't even get close to him. He just completely threw it over Oscar's head. And Oscar's a pretty big kid. He's like 6'4". So that's saying a lot. That said, I like the O-line. I think that helped. Again, Southern Miss, I think, was stacking the line. And as everybody expects to do against UTSA, they're going to come and stack the line because they don't want to get hurt by Sincere McCormick, though he still hurt them later on in the game. But it was good to see Maka back. It was good to see everybody kind of return back to their normal positions and really have the offensive line that we need. Because, I think, again, Frank had time. If he's not going to be able to make those throws, then I think that, again, calls into question is he the right quarterback for UTSA? Again, that's not for me to answer. I can give you my opinion, but I think I've already kind of outlined it throughout the year.
The other thing that should have helped Frank in this game was that, last game we saw a lot of high snaps coming from Kevin Davis. He was really struggling last week, and, Frank was really having to pay attention to that, do a really good job of making sure the snaps didn't go over his head. In this game, you had Maka back at center. That wasn't really an issue. There might have been one or two that didn't look great, but nothing like we saw the game before. Right. And he definitely had more time to throw. He just wasn't really able to find those connections.
And which that affects really the receivers, because the receivers really didn't have a big impact. But the reason they didn't have a big impact was because Frank couldn't get to the ball. Though Zakari did have a pretty good game in terms of at least being able to reach 1,000 career receiving yards. So, good for him. I mean, I think, again, if we can get a passer, a guy that can pass the ball back there, with Sincere's running and with the passing attack, I think these receivers can make some plays. And you see it from time to time because they're not the tallest guys. They're all usually about over 6 foot, but they're strong kids and they break arm tackles. And that's really what they're kind of faced with mostly from these secondaries that they're facing. So I think that's promising that they're, if we give them the ball, let's go.
Absolutely.
So with that, I mean, I would just say about Sincere he was the man on offense. He, much like you said, La Tech, he was the guy. So just interesting that he was able to at least get a couple of weeks off and come back and he was productive.
All right, let's talk about what we learned from the game.
Sure. So, for me, I think we learned that UTSA is evolving and they don't have to play clean to win on the road, which is a good sign because obviously you're not always going to have the perfect game. You're not going to play the cleanest of games. But I just think that just in years past, and I'm not just counting the Wilson years, I think I'm also counting the Coker years where I think you can see that this team is starting to move forward past just trying to have to play their best in order to win a game. Again, they didn't play well, but they got the win, and that's all that really matters. And I think they were really focused on getting a win, and they just didn't care if it was going to be ugly, pretty, whatever. Last week they had a really nice, pretty win, so to speak, because everything kind of worked on offense and defense. They played pretty well, but there's going to be these games where they're just going to get a little sloppy, and you have to find a way to win, and they did.
Yeah, Traylor said it's kind of like all of our wins. We have 6 of them, and 5 of them are just like this. 1 was pretty, meaning UTEP. The other 5 were just us scrapping it out.
Yeah, and I mean, that's okay. I think what that hopefully builds for the future is that they know how to find a way to win the game and to figure out what they need to do. Is it just, do they need a little extra juice and a little more energy, whatever? They're going to find a way to do it. With that, I think the other big thing that I would say that we learned, but I think I just want to say out loud is that, there's a lot of issues that are out there for the team in terms of like tackling and some of these penalties. We kind of already talked about a little bit about it already, but it just seems like the UTSA fans just get they want to build that narrative of this team isn't, I don't know, isn't disciplined, isn't, they're just not good enough to get away with this. Well, I think they proved in this game that they're getting to that level where they can have some sloppiness and they can still win. But, the penalties aren't going to get fixed overnight. I would say if you look back at the last few games, this game, it was 5 penalties. Last week, I believe it was 6, then 5, then 6. And then you go back to the Army game, which was 9. So we're consistent around being like 5 to 6 penalties, but for the year, we're still averaging 7 penalties a game. That matches last year when there was 7. It was 7.4 a game. The year before in 2018 is kind of laughable because the team was just so bad that they averaged only like 5. But I think it was because a lot of them were declined. I just don't remember that. But after that, it just starts going back up, and you keep going back in history, and it's 7, 7, 7. So this is what the team is. We kind of talked about it a couple podcasts ago. Ain't nothing but a program thing. That's who they are. Tackling wise, I think, they haven't been good tackling in a few years. They've had problems. I think you'll probably see better tackling if they become better open field tacklers, because that's where you kind of see the issues where can they wrap up? Can they do, can they go and actually be a little bit more technical in how they approach tackling? But that cuts into time as to plays and, perfecting plays and sort of that rhythm. So, it gets tough. And
the fact that we didn't have spring ball and we didn't really have a lot of practice in the summer, those are things that you can see are, a result of the lack of training that they had, and hopefully those are things that we can get cleaned up next year, and hopefully we will have spring ball next year. But I guess that's still up in the air right now.
Yeah. And having a chance to really work on it and having the coaches really harp on it over the summer, and then maybe having some spring ball games or spring games, that will help to, kind of clean up maybe some of these issues and maybe at least bring them down to a little more tolerable level. But Southern Miss was leading. I think they're one of the top 3 teams in terms of penalties. Does that really make them more disciplined, or does it just mean that they can either get away with more calls? I think you can look at penalties a ton of different ways. Tackling, though, is a problem because obviously it just gives the other team an opportunity to make bigger plays. So
yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about this being the 6th win, and obviously that was something that you saw celebrated quite a bit by the team.
Yeah.
This year, obviously, the NCAA has waived that 6-win bowl eligibility requirement due to COVID. But, I feel seems like there's still that feeling of accomplishment of achieving that win record, even if you don't have to do it this year. We know the number of bowls is reduced this year. At least, I think 2 of the bowls have been canceled from Conference USA. Any concerns that the Roadrunners will be left on the shelf again like we were in 2017, or do you think a bowl invite is imminent this year?
In 2017, I understood why it didn't happen. We were a boring team. We just were not exciting to watch. We were a decent product, but we weren't, I would say, have any excitement to us, any flash. This team is different. And I would say the reason that this team is also going to be a little bit seen differently and why they probably wouldn't be left on the shelf is because of the fact that we've already played 10 games and now we're going into our 11th game. Very few teams have played that long. And if you remember, during that gap between September and October, you were seeing UTSA on screen. You were seeing it on ESPN. You were seeing people flock to see, oh, hey, check out what's happening. And if you remember, there were like some tweets coming out from people that never would watch a UTSA game, but they saw us against BYU and saw us go toe-to-toe with BYU. They saw us play, UAB, and people were surprised, but they're like, oh, maybe it's just a one-off. But it's turned out to not really be a one-off. The only game they've really struggled and have just not been able to, I would say blown out would be the FAU game. But even then, it was still 17-3 for most of the game until by the end, you went for a 4th down and gave them an easy touchdown at the very end. But I just think that they've built enough excitement, not just from the fans, but I think around TV sponsors, that they're going to get a shot. The question is, unless bowls all of a sudden just start canceling by the handful,
which could happen. I mean, you just really don't know what's going to happen with COVID after Thanksgiving. So there's still that possibility that more bowls could cancel than we expect. The other difference, between us and the 2017 team is our conference record. I think a lot of people forget we were only 3-5 in conference in 2017. We were, I think, 5th maybe in the West. Right now, the conference standings obviously are a little goofy this year because, UAB hasn't played that many games. So, is it going to be UAB? Is it going to be us? It's still a little hard to see who's going to win, based on how many games might get rescheduled. But we're probably at worst, 2nd, maybe 3rd in Conference USA West. So
yeah, I think one other thing to take into account here, I think too, is the fact that we have played those 10. We're going to probably play the 11th here against North Texas, but it's a testament to us being able to handle COVID. Yeah, we've only had one game where we had to cancel because of COVID, and because of that,
and honestly, it probably had a lot to do with the injuries just as much as it did COVID.
Right, but I think that from a bowl perspective, getting a UTSA team that's young, that's a little exciting, and be able to handle COVID, like not have to potentially deal with the fact that you might get a last minute cancellation because all of a sudden, or have to make an adjustment and say, oh, we're going to push back the bowl a week or whatever because they're dealing with COVID. This team has shown that they're disciplined enough to deal with COVID, even if it doesn't translate necessarily in the field. Right. I think to me, that's a big check mark for UTSA.
Yeah. I also wonder with the Bulls this year if, they're going to look at the teams differently. Like you just said, they'll probably look at how do they handle COVID, the cancellations. They may look more at the regional aspect rather than, you sort of look in the past. Bulls would look at, who has the fan base that's going to travel. And this year, just given the situation, I wonder if that's not going to be as much of a factor. If they're going to say, look, let's find teams. The Frisco Bowl has been mentioned several times for UTSA. Let's find a team that can drive and travel because we have a better opportunity of getting people to come to the game that way versus trying to bring somebody in from across the country who maybe has a fan base that can travel but will choose not to during this time, or, just depending on what happens with travel restrictions and quarantine, those things might get impacted.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's absolutely a great point.
The other thing that we learned, or that was sort of interesting this game, was that during the game, Coach Nix sent out a tweet, or I guess it was after the game, he sent out a tweet saying, congratulations to Coach Traylor, and congratulations to UTSA football, and then included the hashtag Godspeed on my return. So it certainly seems like he is under the impression that he'll be rejoining the team at some point in the future.
It does. It was kind of interesting, but I think everybody's been also kind of looking. We've all been kind of looking, and there was a lot of people that kind of took his tweet and started retweeting it, started liking it. It was rather interesting to see him start commenting. So it just kind of makes you feel like maybe this isn't as big of an issue as we think it is, or maybe it's not as hard of a violation that we think it is. It was just either something happened, and here's where it, here's how we're going to handle it. But let me ask you this. Looking from Lisa Campos's perspective, and you having some experience with kind of disciplinary issues, How would you feel if you saw that tweet?
It could be one of two things, right? Well, first of all, you've got to give credit to Lisa Campos because she has absolutely shut down the rumor mill, whether it's this situation or really even when we were looking for Traylor as a coach. She really does a great job at keeping things internal and shutting down the rumor mill in a way that we haven't seen, from the administration before.
Right.
So you got to give her credit for that. On the one hand, if he did something and he's kind of in denial mode and is sending out this tweet, and I'm Lisa Campos, this may be the thing that makes me decide, hey, this isn't the right guy. Or he's not getting, the level of severity of the issue. On the other hand, it could be a situation where, you don't want to speculate too much because you just, again, you have no idea what happened, but maybe there was something that happened personally or outside of the team, and, he's hoping that they can work through it and it's not that big of an issue. Obviously it's a serious issue either way because he's suspended, but it's not the same type of issue as if, he was suspended for an internal investigation because there was some kind of misconduct with a team, somebody on the team or, somebody on campus. So I don't know. It's odd. It's interesting. I don't know if we'll ever really know what the real story is. But it just added a little more spice to the game, I guess.
Yeah.
For the post game.
But I think, I just really also want to clarify that I'm not diminishing any of this violation when I say, maybe it's not as bad.
Right.
I think you hit it on the head. There's, I think, levels to how bad this could be in terms, like you said, of misconduct,
right?
As opposed to, there's something, it's like, again, we shouldn't speculate, but there's something that's not as bad as the misconduct with a player or with somebody on campus or something like that. To that point, I think there's levels, and I think that whatever Lisa felt was, it's serious enough that we need to nip it right now. We need to discuss it. We need to start figuring out what all happened, and then we just come back and we make a decision.
Well, at the end of the day, you have to remember, just because something's being investigated doesn't mean it really happened. I mean, he could be investigated for some kind of conduct. That doesn't mean he did anything wrong. It just means that there was an allegation. They had to look into it. They had to take it seriously. So, I think a lot of times when you see these investigations come up on teams, you tend to assume the worst. But I think that Lisa Campos is someone who takes situations very seriously. I can see her taking a more conservative approach, putting someone on administrative leave and investigating something, where maybe another AD would not want to have the disruption to the team and may try to take a different approach. So.
Yeah, maybe they would have just suspended him for one game and then he comes back. But you're right. She's taken a different approach, and, we respect her for it.
But more to come there, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so who is your offensive player of the game?
So in honor of Bootleg, I'm going to do an honorable mention here because we had that one game where in FAU that we had nobody. And we got to make him proud. Maybe we should call it the Bootleg honorable mention or something. But I'm going to give that to Oscar Cardenas. He's played well, and I often think that he's going to end up being an offensive lineman, and that was kind of, I've heard that before from some of the recruiting guys. But I just think that he's gotten an opportunity now that Gavin Sharp has been out of the way, and he's taken advantage of it, and good for him. Like there's a lot of times when people are missing and guys don't step up to the plate, and he has done just a good job of not only shoring up the blocking and really giving us two good blocking backs with Leroy in there as well. Leroy's also been a little banged up, as Coach Traylor kind of mentioned before. So it's been good to see Oscar get in there. Again, I don't know if he ends up being on the offensive line, it ends up being a tackle or something, because he is a good blocker. But aside from his one shot where Frank just put it over his head, I thought where his biggest contribution was just the blocking, and that's been great. But obviously, the offensive player of the game has to be Sincere. This is not even a question. We don't have to go through his stats or anything. because honestly, if it wasn't for him and his running, we may not be here. I will say that Brendan Brady could have come in and probably done maybe the same that he did. Maybe not as explosive, but still giving us a little bit more of an all-around game. But, when Satier's given the ball and he's, asked to take control, he does. Again, he's still my Tim Duncan of the team. Just quiet, goes, does his job, and there he is. And look what happened. What a great game. And
a couple of records this game. He tied Jarvion's 8th career 100-yard performance, and he broke Jarvion's single-season rushing record and matched Jalen Rhodes' single-season record of 9 rushing touchdowns. So
still another game to play. So
I know he's got
and of course the bowl game too. So you know,
and again, he's only a sophomore, so he is definitely going to be in the record books for the next few years.
All these guys. I mean, Zakari, Sincere, Frank will be in there. Even whoever takes Frank's place, if somebody comes in, they're all going to be there. So it's just good to see these guys really take off.
Yep. What about your defensive player of the game?
All right, the bootleg honorable mention. I'm going to go Tremaine Bell, he hasn't had a lot of snaps, and I saw Javi had posted this as well. Not too many snaps, but he's making an impact, and it's good to see them. The defensive line has just played really well. They played well again this week. I thought Rashad had a really good game. I think he got away from doing some of the silly stuff that he does. He still kind of talks trash to the other guys, which I wish he would kind of just. I feel like that kind of gets him unfocused, but that's just for me. That's my take on him. Well, whatever. Other people can disagree, but I mean, he's a really good safety and he's a playmaker, and that's
a great interception.
He did. With that, my player of the game is Trevor Harmonson, not just because of the fake field goal issue. He was all over the place this game. He really commanded that middle linebacker position. And honestly, going back to last year when our middle linebackers just weren't very good at all, he came in, I want to say middle of the year last year, maybe it was a little bit later, and he was kind of splitting snaps because it was more of a 2 linebacker system. But he's really nailed down this linebacker position, and he's really brought some good playmaking ability. And it was good to just see him play really well there at Southern Miss because we really needed someone to be heady. And, he had some opportunities for a couple of at least one interception. I should say a couple, but one interception where he kind of went up for the ball. And but he's just he's playing just really smart. So those are my guys.
All right. Before we go, we've got some men's basketball news. The men's basketball season opens this Wednesday against Oklahoma. And we just received the final non-conference schedule for the Roadrunners. They added a home game, now our home opener, on Friday, November 27th against UT Permian Basin, and an away game on December 16th at Oregon State. So for those of you who haven't been keeping track, that means there's going to be 3 basketball games this week. The men's basketball team will play again Wednesday at Oklahoma, Friday at home against UT Permian Basin, and Saturday at UT Rio Grande Valley. It's going to be an interesting season to see how COVID impacts the men's basketball teams.
Yeah, definitely, because this is kind of just like affecting an entire position group in football, and we see how that kind of wipes out some of these teams. So, one guy gets COVID, there's contact tracing. We might not see if it's UTSA, if it's North Texas, if it's Duke, we might not see them for a couple weeks. Yep. So,
yeah, buckle up, folks. It's going to get crazy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
All right, well. Thanks again for joining us for the Hail Married podcast. We hope you and your family have a safe and socially distant Thanksgiving. I'm A. Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll see you next week.